Prince William was only seconds away from entering what should have been one of the most controlled meetings of the royal calendar when he stopped without warning. Through the partially opened door, he recognized someone who had no expected place in that room, a private solicitor associated with Meghan. William did not demand an explanation. He did something far more dramatic. He turned to his aide and canceled the entire Crown briefing. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stood motionless, his briefing folder tightening beneath his fingers as what he had seen settled in. A Crown briefing was a private meeting where senior royals, household officials, constitutional advisors, and planners discussed duties, schedules, institutional risks, and sensitive family matters. Attendance was controlled because one unexpected person could change what others were willing to say. Yet Meghan's private solicitor was seated at the main table, speaking quietly with a palace legal advisor as though expected. William turned immediately to his private secretary. He did not raise his voice or step through the doorway. He ordered the meeting cancelled and demanded to know who had authorized the solicitor, what material had been placed before him, and whether discussion had begun. The restraint made the moment sharper. An aide noticed the folder bend in his grip. For William, this was no longer about Meghan. A private family dispute might have crossed into official business without his knowledge. Charles received the message minutes later and reacted with frustration. The king had expected a difficult briefing, not a collapsed one. But when he learned William had received no notice of the solicitor's attendance, his expression changed. He asked one question, then asked again, who approved it? No answer came. Then another detail surfaced. A chair had been prepared for the solicitor beside the palace legal team, with a sealed agenda packet marked confidential. William's concern hardened into suspicion when staff checked the attendance sheet. The visitor's name was there. The authorization column beside it was blank. Someone had expected him inside that room. Someone had prepared for his presence. Yet nobody seemed willing to leave a signature. William ordered his team to retrieve the previous 72 hours of internal correspondence. What emerged suggested this had not been a spontaneous misunderstanding at all. The path to that chair had begun days earlier, with decisions made quietly enough that even the future king had been left outside them. And when William began tracing how Meghan's solicitor reached that table, the cancelled meeting stopped looking like an awkward misunderstanding and started looking painfully personal. The stranger at the briefing table may have triggered William's decision, but the emotional weight behind it had been building for years. Meghan was nowhere inside the palace that morning, yet her presence seemed to dominate every conversation. Harry was hundreds of miles away. Charles was caught between his sons, and William suddenly faced the possibility that a family relationship he believed already broken had entered an entirely different arena. William understood why the distinction mattered. As the future monarch, he was not only Harry's brother, he was responsible for protecting the line between private family disputes and official crown business. Crown business meant the formal work of the monarchy: duties, schedules, confidential planning, and decisions made in the institution's name. If personal conflict had entered that space through legal channels, then trust had become more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. Harry and Meghan had their own concerns. Within this dramatized account, they had been seeking written clarification about how future contact with the royal household would work, including which private messages could be retained, represented, or challenged through legal counsel. Harry had authorized his representatives to speak with palace lawyers, but the communication later recovered by William's team did not ask for access to his brother's briefing. Charles felt the pressure immediately. Two separate messages reached him within minutes, one from William's office, another through Harry's representative. The king read both, then set them down without answering. He knew whichever son received the first response might read meaning into the timing. Instead, he asked for a chronology of every contact that had led to the solicitor's presence. William carried his frustration to Catherine. He told her the real wound was not the identity of the solicitor, but the fact that someone inside palace operations believed he could be left uninformed about who would attend his own meeting. Catherine listened until he finished, then placed his unopened briefing folder on a side table. She told him that walking into the room angry would have surrendered control. Canceling it had forced everyone else to explain themselves first. Her words steadied him, but the mystery deepened. William's team found a calendar entry marked "Continuity Discussion." Continuity, in palace terms, meant keeping duties and arrangements functioning smoothly when royal responsibilities changed. Why Meghan's private solicitor appeared beside that phrase made no sense. Then one detail changed the direction of the search. Senior aides had dismissed an earlier encounter as routine. Now William wanted every name, message, and meeting connected to it. To understand why one unexpected chair could fracture an entire briefing, William had to return to the moment when the first quiet boundary had already been crossed. The palace would later focus on the cancelled briefing, but the true point of no return had occurred 12 days earlier at Sandringham. It lasted less than 15 minutes. There were no raised voices, no public announcement, and no dramatic walkout. Yet one carefully worded request made during that private conversation created the chain of decisions that eventually placed Meghan's solicitor inside William's meeting room. Charles had entered that earlier discussion hoping to lower the temperature, not raise it. Sandringham, the monarch's privately owned estate in Norfolk, often allowed family conversations to feel less formal than meetings held inside Buckingham Palace. That mattered because officials had been struggling to separate private family exchanges from formal crown correspondence, meaning written communication connected to official royal business. If those two worlds blurred, personal disagreements could begin shaping institutional decisions. Harry joined the Sandringham conversation by secure telephone, while the king and two advisors remained in the room. His request sounded narrow. He wanted his legal representatives to review any future written framework mentioning either him or Meghan before it became final. Harry argued that wording mattered now because private messages, public statements, and official records could easily collide. Charles understood the fear behind it. He also understood exactly how William might interpret it. Charles hesitated before answering. The monarch knew allowing lawyers into family communication risked making every disagreement colder, yet refusing completely could deepen Harry's distrust. After a long silence, he approved something limited. Palace Council could exchange technical clarification with the younger son's representatives. Palace Council meant the lawyers advising the royal household on institutional and legal matters. The king never approved attendance at William's strategic briefing. William learned about that arrangement only later. The prince told an advisor that technical communication was one thing, but placing a private representative at his own briefing table was entirely different. His frustration sharpened when the paperwork was compared line by line. One internal note originally read, "Legal clarification before circulation." A later version said, "Legal presence before final discussion." Those few words changed everything. William immediately understood the danger. Clarification meant lawyers could review language. Presence suggested someone could actually enter the room where decisions were being discussed. Charles had not requested that change. Harry had not requested it either. Somewhere between the Sandringham conversation and the cancelled briefing, an intermediary had widened the meaning without either man explicitly asking for it. William ordered his aides to identify who changed those words. The answer pointed towards someone close enough to the king, and close enough to the briefing process, to make the coming confrontation deeply uncomfortable. By the time William learned how a narrow legal concession had become an invitation through the palace door, his anger was no longer aimed across the Atlantic. It was aimed inside the household itself. William could have allowed aides to handle the problem quietly. Instead, after discovering who had expanded the solicitor's access, he requested a face-to-face explanation. The conversation took place in a narrow corridor, away from the main offices. No cameras, no public audience, no ceremonial language. When the senior advisor arrived, William held the amended attendance note in his hand and asked only 6 words. "Who gave you permission to do this?" William waited for an answer, but the coordination advisor hesitated. The official had interpreted Charles's Sandringham permission broadly and told Palace Council that Meghan's legal representative could attend part of the Crown briefing, Palace counsel meant the lawyers advising the royal household on legal matters. The advisor insisted the solicitor would leave before wider strategy began, but William knew that explanation was incomplete. The prince placed the altered wording between them. He asked who had authorized the change from legal clarification to legal presence. The advisor said he was trying to prevent another family dispute by ensuring every side understood the language before decisions became final. William did not raise his voice. That restraint made the silence heavier. He replied that distrust could not be repaired by secretly widening access and then calling the result peaceful. Charles arrived after learning the advisor was being questioned. The king sensed how far the dispute had moved beyond one invitation. He argued that the official's mistake appeared misguided rather than malicious, and warned William that humiliation would deepen the fracture they were trying to contain. William answered that intention did not erase consequences. Someone had crossed a boundary, and pretending otherwise would make the next breach easier. Then William produced the troubling detail. The solicitor's agenda packet contained material unrelated to Harry or Meghan, including succession planning schedules and future household restructuring. A succession schedule was simply a plan for how royal duties and responsibilities might shift over time. It did not transfer the crown itself. Even so, those pages were never meant to sit before an outside representative without explicit approval. The tension shifted when Meghan's solicitor was contacted separately. He said he believed his invitation had been approved and had no idea William had not consented. That answer weakened the idea of a deliberate intrusion and pushed suspicion back toward palace procedure. William now faced the choice: punish the visitor, blame Harry and Meghan, or confront the system that had allowed the breach in the first place. And as William's anger moved away from the doorway and toward the machinery behind it, the real battle became one of power. Who could authorize access, who could revoke it, and whose word ultimately controlled the crown briefing room. The palace dispute now came down to something almost absurdly small: an empty line on an attendance form. No dramatic confession sat waiting in a drawer. No secret royal order had authorized the solicitor. Instead, William's team found a chain of assumptions, forwarded messages, and altered wording that had somehow acquired the force of permission without ever carrying the signature of the man whose meeting was being entered. William studied the chain carefully, because authority inside the household could not survive on guesswork. His private office controlled attendance at briefings, held specifically under his authority, while the king's household could coordinate participants when business crossed between both offices. That overlap was designed to keep the monarchy functioning smoothly. This time, it had created exactly the opposite: a space where nobody seemed fully responsible. Charles's original instruction had allowed legal clarification. A coordination advisor widened the meaning. Palace counsel then treated the new wording as permission for attendance, and administrative staff followed by preparing a chair, an agenda packet, and a security entry. Each step looked small on its own. Together, they placed an outside solicitor inside William's briefing without his explicit consent. Charles sat alone with the chronology after the room emptied. He reached the line containing his original words, compared it with the expanded version beneath, and slowly removed his glasses. The king finally understood the uncomfortable truth. His attempt to keep peace between his sons had been vague enough for others to make decisions he had never clearly approved. William wanted that weakness removed immediately. He pushed for a written rule stating that no outside legal representative could attend a crown briefing without direct authorization from the royal leading it. Charles agreed with the principle, but he resisted any wording that could appear to punish Meghan personally. The monarch knew one careless sentence could turn procedure into another family confrontation. Catherine urged the same caution. She told William privately that if the rule sounded like retaliation, the palace would create another war. If it applied equally to everyone, it would protect the institution without making Meghan the target. Her reasoning mattered because the internal review had found no message showing the Duchess had ordered her solicitor into the room. Harry reacted angrily when he learned his wife's name was dominating the dispute. During a private call with Charles, he said Meghan would not accept blame for a chair she had never placed there. William now understood the next move had to be larger than accusation. William had cancelled one meeting because the rules had failed him. Now he was about to rewrite those rules, and the consequences would reach far beyond Meghan's solicitor. By the following morning, William's anger had hardened into policy. There would be no dramatic announcement accusing Meghan, no public attack on Harry, and no attempt to pretend nothing had happened. Instead, a short internal directive moved through the royal offices. Every external lawyer, advisor, consultant, or representative would now require written authorization from the principal royal hosting a sensitive briefing before crossing the meeting room threshold. William signed what became known inside the household as the Principal Consent Rule. The idea was simple. The royal responsible for a private strategic meeting had to approve any outside attendee in writing. Permission could no longer be assumed through aides, forwarded messages, or broad interpretations. That mattered, because the cancelled briefing had exposed how easily uncertainty could become authority when several offices handled the same sensitive issue. The prince also ordered the meeting rescheduled under tighter boundaries. Official institutional matters would remain inside the royal household, while correspondence involving Harry and Meghan would move through a separate legal channel. The separation was deliberate. William wanted no more confusion between family disputes and crown responsibilities, and he was prepared to accept criticism if that was the price of clarity. Meghan received the decision directly from her solicitor. She went quiet before asking whether William had accused her personally. The lawyer told her he had not. Her first reaction was anger, but that anger quickly became caution. She understood that challenging a rule written to apply to everyone could make her appear to be demanding access that others did not receive. Harry reacted more sharply. He saw the boundary as another example of his brother tightening control, and during a private conversation with Meghan, he wanted to challenge it immediately. She urged restraint. If the rule covered every outside representative equally, she told him, attacking it could weaken their position rather than strengthen it. William knew exactly how the decision might be portrayed. He told Catherine that people could call it cold, defensive, even personal, but ambiguity had become more dangerous than criticism. She understood why he could no longer rely on goodwill alone. Then the consequences reached inside the palace. The coordination advisor who had expanded the original permission voluntarily stepped away from sensitive briefing duties, while the review continued. Charles accepted the decision with visible sadness. The king knew the official had been trying to prevent conflict, yet good intentions had helped create a deeper one. Charles then made an unexpected request. He wanted to speak with William alone. No secretaries, no lawyers, no advisors. The doors were now secured by written rules, but behind one closed door, Charles and William were about to discover that procedure had never been the deepest problem between them. There were no officials in the room when Charles finally sat opposite William. No solicitor, no private secretary, no agenda packet capable of absorbing their frustration. For the first time since the briefing collapsed, father and son had nowhere to redirect the argument. Charles admitted that he had allowed deliberately flexible language because he feared another confrontation with Harry. William answered that avoiding confrontation had created the very crisis the king hoped to prevent. Charles had stripped away every institutional layer because he knew procedure was no longer the real subject. Years of tension had pushed the family toward advisors, lawyers, and written messages whenever direct conversation felt too dangerous. The king now faced what that habit had cost them. William was no longer arguing about one chair. He was arguing about whether trust could survive when nobody knew where private family business ended and official authority began. William explained his position carefully. His objection was never simply that Meghan had legal representation. He objected to discovering an outside representative inside a sensitive royal meeting without warning. For the future king, confidentiality was not a personal preference. It was part of the responsibility he would increasingly carry, because decisions made in those rooms could affect duties, schedules, staffing, and the monarchy's wider direction. Charles finally admitted what he had avoided saying. He had hoped vague permission would let Harry feel heard without forcing him to choose openly between his sons. William did not attack him. He simply replied that refusing to choose a clear process was still a choice. The king looked away for several seconds before accepting the truth of it. Charles's voice softened after that. He confessed that every procedural disagreement now felt like proof that his family could no longer speak without intermediaries. The admission reached William, but it did not change his decision. The prince said the new rule would remain. He would, however, support wording making clear that Harry and Meghan were not personally accused of arranging unauthorized access. Charles accepted that compromise. The monarch agreed the palace would state internally that the solicitor had entered under an invitation created through household channels, removing the implication that Meghan had secretly planted anyone inside William's meeting. Then Charles proposed something more personal. He would send Harry the explanation himself, without advisors standing between them. William agreed, but insisted the message contain no hidden invitation to reopen the cancelled briefing. For the first time, the dispute had boundaries both men could understand. Father and son had found a boundary they could both live with, yet the public knew only that William had stopped a Crown briefing after seeing Meghan's solicitor, and that single image was about to explode across Britain. By midday, the private confusion inside the palace had become a public spectacle. Broadcasters debated whether William had discovered an attempted legal intervention. Commentators argued over Harry and Meghan's relationship with the monarchy, and crowds outside royal gates stared at phone screens carrying the same explosive phrase, "Briefing cancelled." Yet the loudest interpretation of the story would soon collide with a much quieter set of facts. News organizations seized on the most dramatic version first. William had arrived, spotted a solicitor connected to Meghan, refused to enter, and cancelled the meeting. Those 4 details were enough to ignite hours of debate before the narrower explanation could catch up. The palace declined to discuss private family correspondence, but confirmed within this dramatized account that the briefing had been postponed because attendance arrangements had not been properly authorized. Outside Buckingham Palace, the mood turned the administrative failure into something far more personal. A small crowd gathered near the gates while phones displayed a fictional evening front page, carrying the words, "William stops the room." Beneath the headline sat a split image of William and Meghan, framing them as direct opponents, even though neither had faced the other during the incident. William saw the headline while waiting for the rescheduled briefing. He exhaled, placed the phone face down, and told an aide that this was exactly why the palace explanation had to be precise. The prince understood that one careless phrase could turn a procedural failure into a permanent accusation. Meghan received the same coverage through screenshots sent to her. She became furious when commentators described the solicitor as an emissary deliberately inserted into royal strategy. The emerging internal record pointed somewhere else entirely. The invitation had come through palace channels, and no evidence showed that she had personally ordered an unauthorized entry. Then the tone began to change. A carefully worded clarification stated that the visitor had attended after receiving internal authorization, and that no evidence connected Meghan directly to any attempt to bypass William. That distinction slowed the frenzy. Constitutional commentators soon focused on something different: William's response. His new requirement for explicit written consent before outside representatives could attend sensitive meetings was described as a clear attempt to strengthen institutional boundaries rather than punish one individual. William now faced one final decision. He could preserve the cancelled briefing as another symbol of family division, or he could use it to define the kind of authority he wanted to carry forward. The scandal had begun with suspicion, but its final meaning would be decided not by the solicitor William saw through that doorway, but by what the future king chose to do when he finally walked through it again. When the Crown briefing was finally reconvened, William entered the same room he had refused to enter days earlier. The chair once prepared for Meghan's solicitor was gone. So was the confusion over who had authority to place anyone there. But William did not arrive triumphant. He arrived carrying the uncomfortable knowledge that the crisis had exposed weaknesses on every side: fear, mistrust, poor communication, and a family increasingly accustomed to speaking through intermediaries. William had changed more than the seating plan. Under the new written attendance protocol, every outside participant had to receive explicit approval from the royal responsible for the meeting. The rule, known inside this dramatized account as principal consent, meant permission could no longer be assumed through aides or loosely worded messages. Matters involving Harry and Meghan now moved through a separate legal correspondence channel, keeping private disputes away from official strategic discussion. The prince paused beside the place where the unexpected chair had once stood. Catherine's earlier words returned to him. Real control did not come from humiliating anyone. It came from making the boundary unmistakable. He sat down, opened the agenda, and began the briefing without drama. Charles had also reached his own conclusion. The king accepted that his attempt to avoid choosing clear boundaries had helped create the confusion. William, in return, accepted something equally important. Harry and Meghan could not fairly be blamed for decisions made inside palace administration without proof that they had directed them. Harry received Charles's written explanation personally. He remained angry that the dispute had become public, but the central accusation had been removed. Meghan's solicitor would continue communicating through formal legal channels, yet he would not return to William's crown briefing without direct approval. The cancellation had therefore accomplished something nobody expected. It had not destroyed the monarchy, ended another relationship, or triggered a constitutional crisis. Instead, it exposed a dangerous gray area where family tension, legal representation, and official royal responsibility had begun to overlap. William finished the final agenda item, gathered his papers, and left without attacking Meghan publicly. That restraint became the real verdict. He had begun the crisis in shock, passed through anger, and ended by creating a rule that applied to everyone. The monarchy was not suddenly healed as a family. But one boundary was finally clear. The door William once refused to cross finally closed behind him. Not on another chapter of revenge, but on an era in which uncertainty, family fear, and whispered permission could decide who was allowed inside the most sensitive rooms of the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.